You may begin whenever you'd like.
All right, good evening, everybody, and welcome to the very hot night of July 20th, 2022, and our meeting of the CB6 Executive Committee. My name is Kyle Thide, and I'm the chair of Manhattan Community Board 6. This meeting is called to order at 6:36 p.m., and tonight we are joined by District Manager Jesus Perez. As a reminder to everyone on the committee, New York State law now requires all community board members to have their cameras on and their first and last names displayed from the time the meeting is called to order until the time the meeting is adjourned. If your camera is not on and your name not properly displayed, you cannot count towards quorum. Tonight's minutes will be taken by the CB6 office, and we will now take attendance by roll call. Jesus will conduct the roll call, so please answer present when your name is called.
Good evening, everyone. I will call your name. You will unmute yourselves when your name is called. Please say present, and I will announce if there is quorum. Kyle Thide.
Present.
Thank you. Elvie Barroso. Elvie Barroso.
Elvie is excused.
Okay, Matt Bondi. Matt Bondi. Claire Brennan.
I'm here.
Thank you. John Keller.
Present.
Thank you. Sandra McKee. Sandra McKee. Richard Mintz.
Present.
Thank you. Kevin O'Keefe.
I'm present.
Thank you. Reshma Patel cannot be with us tonight. Matt Roberts.
Present.
Thank you. Sandro Sherrod most likely will not be with us tonight. Mark Thompson.
I am with you tonight.
Thank you. Brian Van Nieuwenhoven.
Present.
All right, with 8 out of 13 members present, we do have quorum.
All right, thank you, Jesus. The agenda for tonight's meeting appears on the screen before you. If there is no objection, we will adopt the agenda as stated. So members of the executive committee, if you object to adopting the agenda, please raise your hand through Zoom. All right, seeing no objections, the agenda for tonight's meeting is adopted. The minutes from the June 15th meeting were distributed to executive committee members ahead of time by the board office. If there is no objection, we will adopt these minutes as drafted. Again, committee members, if you object to adopting the minutes, please raise your hand through Zoom. All right, again, seeing no objections, the minutes from the June 15th meeting are adopted. As a reminder, there are some ground rules for our conversation. In order to conduct an efficient meeting tonight, let's observe a few of these ground rules. First, no one may speak until granted the floor. Committee members, if you have a question about committee business or wish to make a motion, please first raise your hand through Zoom. As a reminder, the chat function should not be used for committee business or questions about agenda topics. All such remarks should be made on the record by raising your hand through Zoom. Chat should only be used to alert us to any technical difficulties you are having, or to state in writing information such as an email address or link that was already stated aloud on the record during the meeting. Next, when a committee member is given the floor to speak, I will first identify you, and then you can unmute yourself so that you can speak. We are required by New York State law to have a transcript of this meeting, so do keep all questions and comments succinct and germane to the discussion. And again, committee members are required by the state open meetings law to have your Zoom cameras on and your first and last name displayed during tonight's entire meeting, which means from call to order to adjournment. If you must step away from your computer briefly, you are required to leave your camera on. All right, I will now deliver my chair's report. First two items are just some points of information. The first is that there has been a warning about a heat wave from up until July 24th. We have put out the resources through our socials and through our emails. Obviously, as community board members, please make sure that you're keeping your ear to the ground. And if there's any support needed, please make sure you're directing it to the help@cb6.org email so that we can get attention to those problems. Again, more information as we get it from the city is being shared through our public channels and through our emails. So please make sure you're maintaining that. Second point is the open meetings law. The state of emergency was extended again. It's becoming a monthly tradition, a monthly holiday, where we wait up and see as the governor extended it. So it has been extended to August 13th. We are allowed to remain completely virtual until then. So if there are any meetings that occur between now and then, they may remain virtual. The anticipation that we have is that this is going to be a monthly thing going forward. But while we anticipate with all of these variants popping up, we now have monkeypox as well. We assume that these will continue, but just in case they're not, the board office staff and myself are also making sure that we have arrangements in order in case we do need to get a quorum in person. It is difficult, but we are making sure that we have all our bases covered. The third item that I would like to jump into is something that we've built upon. This will be a little bit interactive, and Jesus will be helping me with this. But many of you might recall several months ago, or actually when I first became chair, that I asked all committee chairs to plan out your calendar years with the themes that you wanted to focus on, what your agenda topics were to be, the collaborations with other committees, and then also any other type of support that you needed from myself and the board office, whether it be connections or workshopping ideas. Now that we have completed another year, this is the time of the year where we reflect on all of the work that we have done before and see how it inspires and affects the work we want to continue in the upcoming year. So to that end, a couple of months ago, I sent to each of you through Jesus and the board office all of our agendas for each of your committees from the past year and asked for feedback on it. I know that this is kind of an open-ended question. It might be a little bit daunting. It might be a little bit hard to self-reflect on, such big topics. And so I wanted to spend some time today going through each of the agendas from one of the committees and kind of show you what we're looking for as we go forward with our planning meetings. So as you know, later on this summer, I'll be reaching out to each of you to set up a meeting with you and your vice chair. And I'll be pulling in Mark and Sandra on this as well as first vice chairs and second vice chairs to make sure that we have as much feedback and ideas in the room as possible. So Jesus, if you can pull it up, I just want to show you how we can prep for those meetings by examining our previous agendas. We have used the transportation committee. This was something that I had been speaking with Gene with before he passed, because we had gone through these agendas together and had thought it would be a very good sort of model for everyone to look at to see how we're going through all of these feedback points. So as you can see from this, all of the agenda analysis is beginning with the beginning of the calendar year from January going on forth. I've had the community liaisons, the committee liaisons for each of your committees, as well as Jesus and myself. All of our feedback has been put into this template With yours, it'll obviously look very different based on your agenda items and the feedback. But the idea is to take a look at what we have done, what we produced, and what we showed to the public. What agenda items needed follow-up on? What agenda items led to something substantial? What agenda items were really engaging, and also which ones were not so engaging? What engaging to who? Was it engaging to the committee? Was it engaging to the public as well? So Jesus, if you could run through this template with us about like sort of the specifics that we worked on with the Transportation Committee. And then of course, want to talk about it with the rest of you. Are there any questions or comments on this process, or as you think about your agendas going forward? We'll open it up for a little bit of discussion.
Sure thing. Can everyone hear me okay? Excuse me. Sorry, I was drinking water just a few minutes ago and it went down the wrong pipe and I was choking to death. So, all right, we'll start. This is the agenda, as Kyle mentioned, for 2021. So from January to December of 2021. And so let's get started. Transportation. Transportation is a really fortunate committee in some respects, in that unlike some committees like health or education, where the chairs of those committees are really expected to come up with agendas entirely from scratch. The Transportation Committee, while it has a lot of things to discuss, part of the reason it has a lot of things to discuss is because it gets a lot of application-based items in their agenda. DOT will say, hey, we need to come and present on XYZ. There will be an applicant for an inter or intra-city bus stop. Somebody will come and say, hey, I'd like a speed bump there, or parking spaces converted there. And so there's a lot of stuff coming at the committee. So in some respects, it almost at times crowds out any kind of individual ideas from the committee chair of the committee. So it's a balancing act. So in some respects, the transportation has it a little easier because they have so much coming to them. And it starts off with this very phenomenon. It starts off with 2 applications that came to the board by way of DOT for intercity bus stops. Those, there's not a lot of thought that goes into those. It's either, we just put them on the agenda because what are we going to say? No, so we put them on, and the board opines as it will. Another kind of agenda item that we seem to see a lot is relates to legislation, resolutions that support or oppose intros or state legislation. One comment that one can have if you're looking through your agenda is perhaps, is the committee super familiar with this legislation? Have they kept up with this legislation? Do they know what the status of this legislation even is? If you were to ask a random committee member, who maybe even voted for this resolution, hey, did this thing ever pass? Would they know? Those are good questions to ask, because it doesn't seem like those are questions we're asking ourselves right now. And when it comes time, especially for a committee like transportation, where tough choices have to be made, because not everything that comes to it can make it onto the agenda right away. This is a good way to sort of see, okay, let's see, is this worth the committee's time, or is it not? And given that this particular Sammy's Law did not ever come back on the agenda, you ask yourself, how interested is the committee really in this? This particular discussion about 3rd Avenue and increasing pedestrian space between 26th and 32nd Street is a really good example of a really good idea that comes out of the committee. And it's something that the committee, it's a big project, so it's something that the committee will come to over and over again. It will come back in the February agenda, in the May agenda. And this is the project that the board committed money to get Schwartz to mock up some designs, and those designs are with DOT as we speak. So that's a good idea. That's something when you're looking at your agenda, it's like, do you have any of those projects that sort of are really interesting ideas that sort of come back over a course of months and maybe even bleeding into other years that the committee can really sink its teeth into and engage in and at the end, hopefully, a big payoff. As we move on to February, we see that something that happens at the Transportation Committee very often, also as well in the Land Use Committee. When there's a huge project in the district, we will get agency updates with some regularity. So, that's not a lot of, it's neither here nor there kind of thing. And when you're going through and commenting on your agenda items, some of this stuff, it doesn't have to be like, oh, this was really good, or oh, this was really bad. Some of it is just, it is what it is. This is another example of an agenda topic relating to a piece of legislation, the Furious Act. Again, if you were to ask a random committee member, do they know whether this passed or not? Do they know where it is right now? Do they know whatever became of it? Do they know what the legislation purports to do? In March.
Is that an open question for me?
No, that's just, it's a rhetorical question. It's a rhetorical question. And Brian, you didn't write these. You were not chair at this time. So this is, and we went with transportation because transportation's was pretty good. Their 2021 agenda items were pretty good. And there were some where maybe they weren't as strong, some other committees, but we didn't want to do that in front of everyone and have it be on YouTube forever. So we get the idea.
Okay. And like some of this stuff, like I actually do have an idea of some of what happened to a lot of these bills upstate, but I mean, like, just in general, like, they morph a lot. They don't end up being the same exact things as they come through. Like, especially with these traffic control things, they get really hammered on by the Assembly and the State Senate. But you make a good point that, like, for all the other committees and any other committee I've been on, it's a little more straightforward.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a good thing to follow up on. So with these particular ones, like, the one with the speed cams got across the finish line with some modifications.
Yeah. No, it doesn't always have to be it doesn't always have to be the committee chair. It doesn't always have to be the office, because the committee chair the office has a lot that it's doing. There are 10 different committees. There's lots of stuff that the city throws at us. The committee chairs, you're all volunteers. You oftentimes have your own things going on. And who knows? These members are probably looking for things to get involved in to do. So they're not just sitting there being talked at. Maybe if the committees, my own personal view is, unless we're going to be commenting on these pieces of legislation, unless the electeds really, really want the support from the community board, I think that for me, the jury's still out on how effective these kinds of resolutions are on pieces of legislation. But if the committees still want to do them, maybe a good way to do it is sort of to not forget about them once they're passed, and maybe members of the committee can be tasked with, following up every month, every other month to see where this thing goes.
We usually know the outcome within like 20 days of actually discussing it at committee, because of the way the state operates. Like, they have anything that doesn't make it through, like, with the budget at the end of March is dead at that point, unless it gets a second crack in October. So
these two things I don't think made it through, Furious and Sammy's Law. But as we move on, as we move on,
wait, Furious made it through.
Did it?
Yeah, I was just saying.
Yeah.
Okay, because I looked on the website for the legislature, but in any case, I don't know, and
I could be wrong.
So we should
something down the track of that was passed. Probably not that exact piece of legislation. Right. It was hacked in one of the sessions. Maybe not. I forget which one. But we did have it. We can look forward to a much bigger expansion of hours for cameras and stuff like that here in the city. There'll be much more deployments thanks to the new law.
Okay.
And just to jump in here quickly, right? So obviously we're looking at Gene's agendas up until the end of 2021. This was something I was working with him on for quite some time. But the idea is We're just using this as a template for now. So obviously for transportation related things, like when we have our sit down about, how we're looking at the year, we'll obviously go into like further detail about this. But the whole idea is thinking about the year as having a thread following through it, right? That we're not just having random, agenda items thrown up each month and then hoping people are interested in it, but that we're thinking intentionally about, okay, like this year I want to spend time on X, Y, and Z issue. And we want to, by the end of the year, produce X, Y, and Z things. And so the idea is that all of these agenda items are connected with each other, each month, that there's a flow through it, but that when there are things that, come up and are, specific to a particular, piece of legislation, that we're also building into our following meetings, follow up on it. So even if we are individually following it and monitoring the progress of it, that, maybe during the chair's report, we kind of report back and say, hey, we talked about this last month. This is where it is now. And I think, just sort of like putting in those best practices as well, so that the committee also understands that the work that they conducted and the discussions they had was meaningful and led to something. And I think that's always a great thing to reinforce with membership. But before we move on, I know Sandy's had her hand up for a while.
Thank you. I just, Jesus said that some were good, and I wondered what the definition of good was.
I think the reason it is subjective, it is very subjective. The reason I think we kind of looked at this as good is, as we'll see when we move on to further months in this agenda, we'll see, as Kyle mentioned, that there are certainly themes that you can see throughout the entire year. For example, the expansion of pedestrian space. You'll see a couple of agenda items interspersed throughout the year that talk about that. You'll see things like the budget requests that come up more than once, and not just during the traditional budget season. That's a very good thing for the committees to get in the habit of doing. But also, in looking through this and because every committee will be different, we start to get a sense of what common traits do the good ones, quote unquote, share? What common traits do the ones that are not as strong share? And we start to build a knowledge base for being able to, a measuring stick for judging these things. I'm not a committee chair, but so I obviously don't need to come up with agenda topics, and I don't necessarily need to be analyzing agenda topics, but as the office, we see all of these agenda topics, and we keep documents similar to this just for our own record keeping, and seeing them over the course of a year really kind of allows us to see whether there's any kind of theme or overarching progression throughout the year. Also, I do think that part of the office's job is hopefully to make some of this stuff accessible to the public. And if we better understand it, because we see, okay, the overarching theme for this committee is, the increasing pedestrian space in our district, and the overarching theme for the Parks Committee, for example, just as an example, is the liberation of and the increasing of open space, and just writ large, those things can really help the office market these things in the newsletter, pitch them to community members should they ever come to us and wondering, what is this committee doing? What is that committee doing?
Yeah, and just to add to that, Sandy, that's a really good question. And the way that we're looking at this template right now, obviously it says Jesus's names because I asked him to put the template together. But the idea is that these comments are actually done in consultation with Jean. So as you look at your own agenda items, these are the type of comments we want to see each of the chairs reflect on, as well as we have our discussion together. What did you think worked really well? There might be some things in retrospect you're like, oh, I wish, we didn't really spend much time on that. That might not have been a good topic. Or there's some things that are like, oh yeah, actually, I think we need to spend more time on this going forward. So it is really up to like your own evaluation. And the whole idea is that we're not forgetting what we've done in the past year, and then helping it sort of support the work that we're going to do in this upcoming year as well. So it is up to you as well. This is not a rubric or anything like that, oh, like this is what's good and this is what's bad. This is what we had discussed with Gene about what he thought was good and what was bad and things that he wished he did and but didn't do. So that's why we use this as the template, but it may look very different for you. You might say, you know what, we didn't need to have all of these meetings, or we should have had more meetings. So it is up to you as you evaluate as the leader of your committee.
As we move forward to the March agenda, a comment that, the chair of this committee might make, is to explain whether there are plans to bring this discussion back. Yes, there are because X, Y, Z, or no, there are not because of X, Y, Z. The budget request, which I mentioned before, it's good. Last year, transportation really did a good job of making making budget requests a real priority, and they discussed them on a couple of agendas. So that's a good thing. That's a good thing to note. And we saw that this year, more committees also sort of followed suit and did that as well. Obviously, the 2022 year is not over yet, so we have not made documents like this for 2022. We're just starting with 2021. Again, this would be a project update for something that's really big that's going on in the district, ESCR. This particular thing, a question one might ask oneself is, did anything really come of this? There were some questions and concerns from the committee about the vision plan, but we noticed that this project never really came up again. And given that we're not the chair, we don't make the calls on whether these things come up again or not. Those of you guys, when you're commenting on these things, your comments will probably be a little bit more expansive than mine. We were just sort of putting thoughts, seeing what stuck. Again, budget requests come back. This is a reemergence of one of the big projects of the committee, expanding pedestrian space on 3rd Avenue. And this is an instance, more instances of projects that come to the committee by way of the Department of Transportation. So again, these can be either, you can comment on these, but again, these can also be neither here nor there, because unless something bizarre happens, we're not going to say, no, DOT, we're not going to hear these projects that you'd like to put before us. This is another example of a resolution for a piece of legislation. This actually became law. The committee can discuss about whether the resolution that they passed had a role in that, an impact, but it did become law. The July summer hiatus. In August, the committee met, and it was a discussion about increasing pedestrian space around Grand Central. And it's sort of, this is what this is what leads one to believe that, okay, there's an overarching theme that this committee has. It's identifying places where more pedestrian space can be made. And this is something that comes up over multiple agendas. There was no September meeting. In October, again, more application-based agenda topics. This is a topic that sort of came not from DOT, but sort of ad hoc. This is another worthy topic. I don't liaise with the Transportation Committee, so I'm not familiar where this particular topic came from. I'm sure I was told, but I just forgot. But it's still it's a very local topic, but that's what we're here to discuss. It's very interesting, and we can talk offline. But it came back actually not in 2021, but early in 2022. Yep. So yet again, it was something that the committee took its time to not rush through in one meeting. It had the time to really consider it over multiple meetings. And in December 2021, it had no meeting. And again, this is only one way of doing it. It's sometimes it can be tempting to, with so much to do, it can be tempting to just sort of get through the meeting and then never look back. Sometimes looking back can be very helpful. It can be very insightful. It can help with looking forward. And so everyone's committee's agenda, look back is going to look very different. But this is just one way to do it. And Kyle had asked me to send these out several months ago, and I did. But other than like one committee, one or two committees, transportation being one of them, and we didn't really get a lot back. And we thought, well, maybe we just didn't explain it very well. And so we're trying to remedy that now. And yeah, I mean, and even if, you look through your agendas and you find, you know what, I don't know that any of this stuff really matters or was very effective. Great. No one's going to yell at you or anything. It's just, that's a good thing to know. And so it's good to know now so you can sort of course correct. It's in a low pressure, environment. So yeah, I mean, I don't know if anyone
one thing to add to that too, and then in another way too, it's also to recognize the successes that you had. I think sometimes we forget all of the great work that we're all leading, especially within committees. And I think going back to agenda items and something as a simple notation as like this ended up becoming law, I think is really, really important. Giving the example of Rich from the other month, I recall last year with Ida, we had been talking about basement dwellings and making sure that those are regulated, and that ended up actually becoming a state law very recently. And so, that's something that Rich might include on his feedback, saying, hey, this actually ended up leading to legislation. And that's also part of this too, is we want to track the successes. We want to make sure that it's notated, that it's organized as well. In addition to being critical of ourselves. I think, sometimes we're very critical of ourselves because we all care very deeply about these issues, but it's also to notate all the really good things that went on. So as you go with that, I think, it just, again, helps us prepare for the upcoming year to see what agenda items were maybe still need to be focused on, or which ones went really well. And maybe even as we reflect, what was the process that went behind it to make it very successful that we might want to apply to our new agenda items. And then I also think it just helps with the board office, who gets all of these calls and emails about what's going on with each committee. It also helps them communicate externally about what's being done at the committee level, so that they can actually forward people over to your committee meetings.
And one of the things we like to do, we do like to promote the work of the board. Right now, our social media presence is not as robust as, say, as an agency that may have an entire team, devoted to that. But we focus our efforts on our newsletter, and we really try and do a good job on that newsletter. Every month we get, people in the community saying, wow, this is a really interesting newsletter. You guys, really do it really well. It's not like some other boards do, just a bunch of flyers and stuff. We actually try and put, I think journalism is too strong a word, but we try to have little articles and stuff that really inform people about the work that the community board is doing. And by having a clearer sense of what the committees are doing and seeing sort of what their overarching goals are, it helps us identify, oh, this would be a really interesting type article to run, about the really cool work that the transportation committee is doing on, increasing pedestrian space. We've run articles like that. We've run articles on the Parks Committee and their efforts to liberate St. Barton Garden. We've run several articles like that. Kevin, given that he's a writer, wrote them himself. I mean, that was very helpful for us. We'd love to be able to sort of spread the wealth, as it were, the exposure to other committees as well. And so practices like this kind of help us really, really see, from a bird's eye view, what the committees are really doing.
All right, thank you, Jesus. So are there any questions from anybody about that process or how we're thinking about it? Does anyone, I guess we'll just re-forward all of those agendas for each committee, correct, Jesus?
Sure, sure.
Yeah, and what I'll actually do is I'll also attach that Excel that I always send out before the year, so that we can kind of map out what the year looks. And of course, as usual, this is just a skeleton. It's obviously malleable. You're not stuck with what you're thinking about now as we go along in the year, but it just kind of gives a sense and structure to how we move forward. And of course, we can adjust as items pop up and as issues pop up to that, but it just does give us a sense of planning and for committee members, this sense of continuity with each of the committee meetings. All right, I'm not seeing any questions. Again, obviously, you can always email me about it. if you have any further questions on it, but please keep a lookout for that. And also with that, we'll also ask for availabilities to actually connect and speak about all of this work together, because we'll meet with you and your vice chairs and talk together about how we move forward. All right, so seeing no further questions, that's the conclusion of my chair's report. Jesus, I don't know if we're doing a joint one today or if you have anything additional.
Make a joint. I'll waive mine. You've heard enough from me today. It's summer after all.
All right, and thank you again, Jesus, for putting that template together for us.
No, no problem.
All right, so let's jump into our next month's committee agendas and business. And first one is transportation. Brian, do you have anything to say? Or?
Yes.
Okay.
As you said that, I was like, yeah, I'm still getting acclimated to that. No August agenda. I wanted to update what you guys on what we're kind of looking at. So we're actually having structured meetings now about having a potential November session with the public to present information and get public feedback about the present and future of the FDR Drive. We're structuring this. The initial phases of this are not policy making, but they will be hopefully to share some information with the district and with other stakeholders. That is more than just it's open, it's closed, there's a collision, there's not a collision. Like, you know, that's pretty much all the information anybody ever gets about the FDR Drive. And so, you know, the idea of how long is it going to be there, what other purposes can we use it for, everything will be on the table. There'll be a lot in the middle on the table as well, not just open or closed, but the potential for more events on there. That was something I'm inheriting from Gene. He started that. So another thing, we have some bus stop resolutions that we will touch on in September. And there's no, I think, immediate things we did not need to call an August meeting. And we will be following up on 3rd Avenue. There isn't any forward progress on that yet, but I have to talk to someone who already reached out to me from Carlina's office. Getting their attention may be difficult at this juncture, but I will do my best. We want to keep that moving forward. There has been movement with the Grand Central East Midtown Public Realm stuff. But not just some official things. It still exists. We haven't made any action. Final thing that's kind of a new thing is that some stuff has come up, suggestions, complaints, both within the board, to the board, and outside of the board about the different types of micromobility vehicles that are currently all being stuffed into the bike lanes. And just to kind of explain what a broad concept micromobility is, it can be somebody on an older bicycle that doesn't go very fast, and it can be somebody on one of these, you know, electric scooters that are really look like a moped and are just basically right under the limit of being a motorcycle. So those larger vehicles should not be in the bike lane, and there needs to be some sort of correction on that. One thing is that Revel, the share scooter company, does enforce that if they are informed that somebody is where they should not be, if they're riding them in a park, if they're riding them in a specific bike lane, if they're riding them over one of the bridges, they can tell they ban the user. That's great. We need some more of this for gas-powered and privately owned scooters as well. So there's that. People are really concerned about that. People are also concerned about stand-up scooters. They're concerned about e-bicycles. So we're going to have a discussion about that because I see some opportunity here based on the fact that DOT is also piloting mobility freight with the same types of vehicles. And we want more of that because there's a study I saw online. Apparently, one of those cargo bikes can make 6 times as many deliveries as an hour or something like that than an actual gas van can. And not to mention what a huge truck with a lift gate and everything in the back is a pain to park and get things delivered. So if the companies that are doing that pilot are having a lot of success with that, and that was what we expected, we can talk about different provisioning on these avenues when DOT was already coming to us and potentially suggesting an expansion of what's on Second Avenue right now to make it from a curbside lane to a double width bike lane. If they're already looking at such a space provision, we can maybe bring into the conversation that there can be some division. We could justify that division with expanding the deployment of cargo bicycles, and then the e-cargo bikes and the e-bicycles and the mopeds could all kind of share their thing. Just want to throw out there that as much as it's tempting to demonize the mopeds, they have the same concern as everybody else. They don't want to end up under a garbage truck, and they have a right to be safe out there. And I don't want to demonize people who are riding totally legal vehicles and making selfish but generally rational decisions to try to stay safe out there. We do have to deal with it, though. This might be a great way to bring this all together and a thing looking off to the future. I do not know if this is going to happen anytime soon. We're going to discuss it. I'm done. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Brian. Any questions for Brian in transportation? All right, seeing none, thank you, Brian. And we'll move on to Kevin with Environment and Parks.
Thanks, Kyle. We did not have a meeting this month. Our next committee meeting will be in September. Let's see, requests for partnerships. We continue to reach out as needed as we do research committee topics for our future meetings. Give you an example on the topic of parks communication. Yesterday, in advance of the meeting that actually happened today, I met for close to 2 hours in Stuyvesant Square Park with the Stuyvesant Square Neighborhood Association to address its concerns about that park. Today, I spoke in a Zoom meeting that Jesus and Alex also attended about Stuyvesant Square Park. On board that call was the Manhattan Parks Commissioner, Deputy Commissioner for Operations, Chief of Staff, our district parks manager, and others from the Parks Department, along with the representatives from the Stuyvesant Square Neighborhood Association, the NYPD, 13th Precinct, Councilmember Rivera's office, and Partnerships for Parks. Commissioner Castro reported that in the near future, new parks dollars will bring hundreds of entry-level workers to the Parks Department, and that interviews for those positions just started to happen. He expects by the fall, all those jobs will make a big difference in our district's parks. He also promised other action, including with DOT. He says that he's reaching out tomorrow about long-promised additional lighting for the park. So again, I think that in the spirit of partnerships, things are happening there. On committee vision, once again, as Jesus alluded to, more open and safe green and park space in the district does remain a priority. One thing I would love to work with is any other committee to reopen a discussion about the long empty Solo site. I think we all know what we're talking about. I bring this up because ownership of that site has started to raise the plant growth there, and we should probably find out if any development is afoot. That's all from me.
Great, thank you. And yes, so Sandy and I actually had a meeting with the borough president's office on and their new land use liaison about that site as well as other sites. So we'll definitely pull in parks as we get into further details about that, because that's definitely something we'd love for spaces like that to be used for green spaces and public use, not a empty pit.
Thank you for that.
Absolutely. All right, any questions for the Environment and Parks Committee? All right, seeing none, thank you so much, Kevin. And we'll move on to Budget and Governmental Affairs, which we'll waive since Reshma is out. Health and Human Services will also be waived since LV has been excused. Let's go to Housing and Homelessness with Rich.
I'll be brief because we didn't meet last month, and we are not meeting this month. The only thing I have to report is that DHS has commandeered at least one more hotel, the Marcel, for temporary shelter housing, this one for families. It happens to be across the street from me, and I didn't even notice until Jesus told me. Jesus and Kavitha both told me. And so it must be very low impact, but we'll keep our eye on it. I have a bunch of items on my agenda to deal with in August in preparation for September, including planning for some sort of community forum about tenant protections in the fall. And that's really all I need to say today.
All right, thank you very much, Rich. Are there any questions for Rich in the Housing and Homelessness Committee? All right, thank you very much, and we'll move on to public safety. Matt?
I can waive my report. We did not meet last month. We're not meeting this month.
Okay. But quick reminder that National Night Out is at the beginning of July, beginning of August. So if you have not signed up to volunteer, please do so. I'll be out there. If anyone would like to join, please let me know. And Matt, do you want to add anything to that, or?
No, I mean, there's both precincts have events simultaneously. I'll be hosting the 17th precinct, obviously. But hopefully good weather. We have live music and food and a bunch of other little things. Kid friendly and pet friendly.
Perfect. And if you haven't been before, let's have this year be your first time, because it is a lot of fun. And it is great to see everybody in the community. So definitely, if you can, drop by the CB6 booth and say hi. All right, thanks, Matt. Any questions for public safety? All right, we'll move on to land use. Sandy?
We didn't have a meeting last month. I mean, we won't have a meeting next month. Sorry, a siren in the background there. And I think moving forward, we definitely will follow up with the DDC regarding public use of the space under the FDR that's being used for parking right now, where we want to follow up on the sustainable development. That's something that we've talked about at our last meeting, working with CB3 for that. And also equitable development, which we need to contact city planning and see how that's moving forward through the whole city development zoning platform, how that's going to be put in place.
All right, perfect.
That's it.
All right, thank you so much, Sandy. Are there any questions for the land use committee? All right, seeing none, we'll move on to John and youth and education.
And following a theme, we're not meeting this month and not meeting next month. Partnerships are very important to us. I have a very good relationship with the superintendent for District 2, as well as with the Community Education Council for District 2. And we'll be looking for better ways to partner with both of them moving forward. There's a lot, as some of you might know, going on in the education space, and I'm trying to position our committee in a meaningful way to be part of that discussion. That's all. I think that's what I would say.
All right, thank you, John. Are there any questions for the youth and education team? Yeah, obviously a big priority, as well as we've all heard, has been the budget cuts to the education system. So that will obviously be of big concern to us in the committee as we go forward. So thank you, John, for.
Yeah, no, as you know, I wrote a statement for the joint committee of the City Council, Education Committee and Operations Committee, speaking just for myself. And there's a lot of confusion and double talk around this issue. So we're trying to get something useful for people to consider.
We witnessed the mayor get heckled about that at the Astrid Levy ribbon cutting on Monday.
Yeah, there's a lot of heckling on all sides. And a lot of this is confusion as to whether and how much of the funding is available that's left over from COVID, and it gets, Comptroller Lander put out a major study on some of this, and it gets very, you can get in the weeds very quickly. I guess I'll just say that.
All right. Thank you, John. Any questions for youth and education? All right, seeing none, we'll move on to business affairs and licensing. Claire?
Hello. Similarly, well, we're supposed to meet next week, but we were able to waive the applications that came in. So we're not going to be meeting in July, which is, I think, exciting for the committee, or me at least. And August is still information, and it's kind of a long way away, but it will creep up on us. I intend to hopefully let that one be canceled too, but we'll see what comes in from that. I do want to add that Jesus and I joined, I don't know actually what it was called, but the marijuana kind of task force discussion with all of the Manhattan community boards. And it was interesting and informative. A lot of people, including Jesus, thank you, asked a lot of questions. They did say up front, you know, we're not going to have the answers for you, which they definitely didn't. But I think that it's something to keep our eyes on. We have been, but they are making progress and kind of coming up with some structure and plans for moving forward. So it was interesting to see that, or to hear that certain boards had specific task force on the legalization of marijuana. So that might be something that we would want to consider, just to like get me or business affairs and licensing, health and youth and education together to kind of strategize, because it's, you know, they introduced it and it is kind of, I haven't really thought about it like this, but it's introducing a new industry to the city, which is unprecedented. So I would be interested in kind of leading some charge and collaborating with the committee, all committees and our members on what we might want it to look like in our district. But thanks for sending the invite. And
yeah, appreciate that. And that's one of the things I asked Claire and Elvie to have initial discussions on, because it is so closely related to that, but definitely also includes John and possibly even Matt on public safety as well, just to see how all of these things actually end up being in practice. But John, you have a question or comment?
Yeah, I've had a preliminary discussions with, which haven't taken enough form to raise to the level of being reported here, but with Senator Kruger's office on this, especially in terms of the proximity of places selling CBD or THC related products, especially gummy bears and candies near schools. And my understanding is that the legislation as passed mirrors the 200 and 500 foot rule for alcohol sales, but we're trying to get to the bottom of that, meaning you can't sell alcohol within 200 feet as measured by a tape measure of the door of the school, and you cannot have on premises within 500 feet of the door of the school.
yeah, they did confirm that in the call. So
Great.
I think that, they also said that they were going to send around the presentation that they presented, so we can I haven't gotten it yet, maybe the office has, but John, I think there was, you have, or no?
I have not.
But there was a few slides that like touched on youth and schools and that whole, most of your concerns directly. So
yeah, I think that's. I'm happy to hear that. I just didn't want to push it during the summer, but I think that will catch some people by surprise, and so we will be doing people a favor by making this more well known, I think.
We have asked for it and we'll send it around. I took some notes, so if you guys want me, I can circulate those among the executive committee. It was a very long meeting, And a lot of it was focused on the sort of social justice aspect of this legislation. I did not really focus on that. I focused more on the sort of practical, like how does this involve the community board? So you won't really see any of that in my notes. But to emphasize what Claire said, this was actually a meeting organized by the Manhattan Borough President's Office with Manhattan Community Boards and the newly created State Office of Cannabis Management. They've been around not even a year, 8 months, they said. And they said that they're in the process of drafting the regulations of how community boards will be involved in the applications for retail dispensaries. So it might be good now to start thinking about, as various committees, what sort of things are you going to want to know about the applicants? What sort of places are not going? There are certain places in the law where they're not going to be allowed, like near schools, playgrounds, and things like that. But are there other requirements the community board will have? Are there certain concerns the community board wants to address? What's the regulations to address? So that once the regulations are issued, there will be a 90-day comment period. And the Office of Cannabis Management encourages community boards and the general public to write in with remarks. But it never hurts, given that 30 days is the bare minimum for a turnaround for a resolution with us and any other community board. It never hurts to start thinking about that in advance, sort of the way the bulk committee spent a time in advance of the release of open street dining regulation. So just food for thought. They did say, however, there will be some dispensaries coming online, somewhere 150 of them somewhere in the state by the end of the year, and those are coming online under the auspices of another law, not the law. Margo, I forget what the acronym MRTA stands for. I have it written down in my notes. Not under the auspices of that, but under a different law. And while the Marijuana Regulation and Taxation Act allows for community boards to be involved, this other law, these 150 licenses that'll come online by the end of this year, there is no obligation to involve the community boards in those. They said that they will try, but not making any promises.
Thank you, Jesus. And yeah, if you can, once they respond back to our email about getting the Rudy recording and the presentation or the slides, please let us know.
I'll send you my notes, just right away, and yeah, whenever they get back to me on the presentation, I'll send that to you. So you'd like me to send it to all of exec or just like the relevant committees?
I think like we can pull in the relevant committees, and obviously during these report backs, we can talk more about those updates.
Okay, so that's bulk, health, youth and ed,
and we'll put Matt in there as well.
Public safety.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Thank you, Jesus. Any other questions for business affairs and licensing before we move on? Okay, seeing none. So we're now at old or new business. If any committee member has any old or new business, please raise your hand at this time. All right, seeing none. Seeing no further business, we'll adjourn the meeting at 7:34 p.m. All right, thank you, everybody, and enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thank you, everyone. Stay safe, everyone.
Cool.
Bye.
Cool.
Happy summer.
There.